I will eat them here and there. Say, I will eat them anywhere.
Another thing that my wife and I decided when Random House asked if I'd do a book like this, we didn't want to extrapolate too much from our own personal story, because I understand you met our children briefly. They're 8 and 4. My wife and I understand that we're still at the rapture stage. The teenage years are ahead, and we're told that demonic possession is very common. And also you adopt and you begin to understand a lot of people in your circle of friends. You never knew this before, or at least you never sort of copied that fact into your consciousness before. Their families are blessed by adoption too. So I tell vignettes here about, I guess, 12 other stories. My colleague Steve Inskeep, who was adopted by Roland and Judy Inskeep in Carmel, Indiana. Thomas Lauderdale, the founder of the group Pink Martini, wonderful music group out of Portland. Steve Levitt, the University of Chicago Freakonomics professor. He and his wife Jeanette lost a little boy, Andrew, when he was just 1. They now have 2 daughters adopted from China. Jeff Seller, the Broadway producer. He grew up adopted by a couple in Detroit, and now he and his partner Josh have 2 youngsters. Judge Ann and Alderman Ed Burke in Chicago, they have 5 adopted children who were adopted and went through a celebrated court case. Martin Simon, the son of the late senator from Illinois, who opened his life to a mother who had given him up for adoption. And in fact, I'm going to read a little of his story, if that's all right, because as Cheryl pointed out, I do have a love of Chicago and politics, and Martin's the son of a famous Illinois politician. Let me just read a little bit of that section, if I could. By the way, in Gaithersburg and the Beltway area, when you say Paul Simon, you mean the senator. I've made a lot of appearances in the book where they think I'm talking about the guy who, bridge over troubled waters, and I'm always a little bit thrown by that. Alas, I'm not related to either of them. Paul Simon and his wife Jean were both members of the Illinois House of Representatives when they married in 1960 and began to have a family. They had a daughter, Sheila, now Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, by the way.
My classmate.
Your high school classmate? Really? Oh my gosh. She's now Lieutenant Governor of Illinois. Is she remotely qualified?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I thought I'd ask, okay? I mean, yeah. Oh, of course, okay. All right. In the paperback version, I will make that amendment. After a series of miscarriages, they decided on adoption. They specified that they'd like a baby boy. Within a few months, they got a call from their minister. He'd learned a healthy baby boy had been born to a teenage mother who decided she couldn't keep him. Would Paul and Jean be interested? They were. "One thing, Paul," said the minister. "I don't know how you and Jean feel about this, but the boy, yes, he's American Indian." Martin Simon has some of the same deep bass chuckle in his father as he tells the story. "My father said, well, that's just fine." It was the 1960s. Paul and Jean didn't go to workshops or culture groups or take their son to Native American conclaves, but they treated his heritage with interest and respect. By the time Martin Simon was growing up in the 1970s, America had taken a turn. Native Americans were portrayed not only sympathetically, but heroically in popular culture. Many children are more eager to be Indians than cowboys on the playground. Martin grew up with the Paul Revere and the Raiders song Cherokee Reservation ringing in his head. He walked around singing, "Cherokee people, Cherokee tribe." He could feel the blood of a great, shrewd, and dauntless Cherokee chief surging through his veins. He identified with their noble and sad history. Paul Simon was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1984 and joined the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. He attended hearings on the reservations, and while he never pretended that he possessed extra knowledge because of his son, he acknowledged that it gave him an extra interest. In 1989, he signed a petition asking the University of Illinois to replace Chief Illiniwek as the official symbol and mascot of its sports teams. The Economist wrote about the Chief Illiniwek controversy and gently noted, "Mr. Simon's adopted son is Native American." As the Simons moved around between Troy, Springfield, Carbondale, Illinois, and Washington, D.C., would have been Montgomery County, I guess, another change I'll make, Martin says he cannot recall being razzed by other children, either about being adopted or about being Native American. My gosh, did you know Martin? Do you know Martin? Okay. So you know this story. You know where this is going. All right. Which is not to say that he wasn't conscious of being both. When he felt anxious or alienated, he told himself that adoption must be at the heart of it. His parents loved him. He felt that. But there were empty spots in his heart that they couldn't fill. He felt that too. Today, he believes that being adopted may actually have helped him sort through feelings of anxiety, identity, and the inadequacies of love as a cure-all. It gives you license, he says. It lets you blame everything on one thing. Once you trace everything to that, other things become easier. Martin Simon was 28 years old, a White House news photographer, and living what he calls a carefree life, when he picked up the phone one day and got a message from the woman who'd given birth to him. Her name was Nikki. She had become pregnant. In trouble was the way we phrased it then. The age of 15, when she was a student at an esteemed high school in one of Chicago's poshest suburbs. I talk about what happened to her then. Nikki had given birth to her son and handed him to a hospital nurse. In time, she met someone and they married. But they didn't have children, and she didn't tell him she'd ever had a baby. Nikki thought of her son a lot over the years, but she held herself back from trying to contact him, even when she had a bout with cancer and worried she might die without ever meeting her son, because she had read that adoptive children needed to be at least 28 before they'd absorbed enough of life to meet their birth mother and have a chance of grasping why she might have given them up for adoption. Martin and Nikki talked on the phone a long time. He'd been reared by two compassionate parents, and he found himself touched by Nikki's story and moved by her concern for the son she'd never met, which had kept her away for so long. They made plans to meet in 2 weeks. Martin took a breath and called his parents. Jean and Paul Simon said they were pleased and a little breathless. Jean said, "Well, thank God this didn't happen when you were 14," which I translate as her thinking, "Thank God this is happening now, when you're already standing on your own 2 feet." Parents who adopt, however well we've been prepared by books, workshops, and counseling to welcome such contact, however grateful we are that our children have the chance to know those who gave birth to them, may forgive ourselves for harboring a lurking vulnerability. If and when we ever get a call like that, we will be genuinely pleased for our child. But we may also grieve and gnash somewhere inside. As Martin, who is now a father of 2 teenagers, says, it's every parent's fear. Given the chance, will my children really want to leave me? Nikki lived on the West Coast. She and Martin made arrangements to meet in Chicago in 2 weeks. They found themselves circling each other, dazed with amazement in the baggage claim area of O'Hare, detecting and delighting over similarities they could see in their faces, in the way they stood, walked, and waved. Nikki had light brown hair like Martin's. She looked about as American Indian as Diana, Princess of Wales. Hours later, after they told their stories, swapped stories, laughed, and done a little crying for each other, Martin asked, "How are we Indian?" Nikki looked puzzled. "It was on my birth certificate," he explained. "All those years I've been growing up thinking," "Oh, that," Nikki said as something suddenly snapped into place. "At the hospital, they asked me to tick off some box, you know, white, Negro, Asian, whatever, and I said, oh, we're all American." Got marked down as Native American. Turns out they were Swedish. Martin said to me a few months ago, I'd already gone to all those powwows. He said, I don't know how to be Swedish. They made plans to meet again in Washington, D.C., where Martin lived, where Jean and Paul Simon lived when the Senate was in session. Jean Simon told Martin how happy she was for him. Her words were warm, but Martin thought they sounded a little brittle, a little unconvinced. You'll appreciate this section in particular, Cheryl. Jean was a deaf politician. She had applauded, saluted, and cheered for many candidates over the years who had shared a party line and knew how to roar with zest for contenders she didn't know and even louder for those she knew well enough to detest. But Jean Simon knew when she had to make a good show. Paul advised Martin, "Son, you're going to have to be especially good to your mom these next few weeks." Nikki arrived at Martin's apartment first. They were having drinks and laughing a little too loudly when the doorbell rang. Jean and Paul Simon walked in, and Jean strode straight for Nikki. When Martin tells the story now, he has to stop, steady himself, clear his throat, and blink. Jean Simon walked up to the woman who gave birth to her son and hugged her. "Nice to meet you, Nikki," she said and smiled. Between the two of us, we sure created something pretty special, didn't we? I'm so lucky, Martin says a little later. He and Nikki are good friends now, and even more, not mother and son exactly, but devoted friends with a place in each other's lives and a permanent stake in each other's happiness. Gene Simon died in 2000, Paul in 2003. Nikki, who's only 15 years older than her son, has become a kind of older family member who knows him less well than an aunt or a cousin with whom he grew up, but is getting to know him better now. Martin apologizes for having to stop and steady himself as he tells the story, has to hold himself back again. I'm sorry, he says finally, but I really miss my mom. There's no doubt, none, about whom he means. Now, I read that story now. There's some obvious local interest, both Illinois and Washington, D.C. Also, as I don't mind saying, I have covered enough politicians and enough politics to to understand that it's the rare public person who looks even better close up than they do from a distance. And Paul Simon, Gene Simon were those people. And that's rare enough that I'd like to know that I miss him. You know, and in the end, I think of this as a book of romances, of love stories. It's about how people find each other, fall in love, and make lives together. And my wife and I grew to feel very strongly about the fact that adoption, for most of us, is not some kind of trauma to be overcome. It's a blessing to be treasured because it transforms our flesh and blood and our dreams. I think we've grown to think there are even some advantages. I think when you have a family in the traditional manner, you might accept things. Yeah, of course I love you, you're my son. Oh yeah, come on, what do you mean, of course I love you? I think in those of us who are families that are blessed by adoption, I think we feel inspired sometimes to utter things aloud about how deeply and poignantly we cherish each other and love each other. Because I think we might be in some marginally better position to understand how important it is to be able to do that. My wife and I also felt it was important to try and open a window on adoption for people who maybe never thought of it, or had only thought of it, or thought that maybe one day they'll get around to it. You don't necessarily have to leave it, as we did, as a kind of last resort. And we also learned that despite the publicity that families like ours get, you know, the actual number of adoptions are down. There are a number of reasons for that, and many of them are good. And I touched on them a bit because we're living in a time where there's so many accomplished ways to have families. And I'm glad for all of them. We obviously tried a few ourselves. But you know, as of this week, there are an estimated 150 million orphaned, abandoned, and relinquished children in the world today. And these are children who are growing up without families or homes. They're growing up in institutions or in fields or on the streets. And as W.H. Auden said, each of us craves not universal love, but the chance to be loved alone. Those children are ours too, and they need and they deserve the love of parents. And I guess my wife and I have grown to feel that putting children who need love and care into families, who crave the love of children, is one of the great unfinished endeavors of the world. I think nothing would do more to increase the amount of happiness on this planet. And that's the kind of global warming that we could all use. And I think the glow from that warmth could light the world.